everybody, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If you are new here and you are seeing me for the first time, my name is Bacon Bears, and I have a podcast called That's My Opinion, where I talk about things and give you my opinion. Today, we are talking about episode 2 of the Scott Peterson face-to-face docuseries that has been put up on the Peacock network. So we already covered episode 1. Today we'll be getting into episode 2. If you want to watch that video, it is in the description box down below or in one of the pinned comments. If you like what you see here today, don't forget to like, subscribe, bang your face against the keyboard. Let's get started. This episode in particular made me feel a certain type of way. It made me feel sad. It made me get in my feels a little bit, and it made me think not so much about Scott Peterson because, as we know, I am biased. I do think that he had everything to do with the murder of his wife and his unborn child. But it just made me think of people who are actually innocent on, death row or that are incarcerated. And, I'm trying to objectively put myself in the shoes of the jury, and I'm trying to objectively put my feet in the shoes of Scott Peterson. And it's difficult because I think that I would act a completely different way than he acted in this entire thing, even now. The episode opens up with the documentarian, who is Shireen Anderson, saying, "After the world heard your phone calls with Amber Frey, who was his mistress at the time," and I wouldn't even, not mistress, just a woman who thought she was seeing a single man, I hate the word mistress for someone like Amber Frey because Amber Frey is a victim in this case. She had absolutely no idea that Scott was married. She had no idea that there was a baby on the way. She thought that she was dating a single guy and met the man of her dreams. So I don't like to use like mistress or other woman. And also too, when she found out all this was happening, she immediately went to the cops and was like, hello, ew. Amber Frey was the person that Scott was seeing while he was married to Laci, and Amber Frey had no idea. So let's just get that straight. I will use mistress to shorten up that explanation, but I hate that word. What's another word? Ugh. It just feels icky. It feels like Amber is less than, and she's not. But it says, after the world heard your phone calls with Amber Frey and they were convinced that you had killed Laci and they turned on you. How does that make you feel? First of all, the world had already turned on Scott way far before Amber Frey even came forward. His behavior, his lack of cooperation, his lack of emotion, just the media immediately saw Scott as a suspect. So that question right there, this is what bothers me with documentaries like this. Like, these are just the kind of questions that you're giving when you're an investigative journalist, right? Yet we're still not asking any of the hard-hitting questions, right? We're in episode 2. Give me something of substance. You're giving me nothing. How did you feel? Probably like shit. How does it feel to be the most hated man in America? How does it feel to have everybody think that you are guilty of killing your wife and unborn child? And then for her to say, after they heard your phone calls. No, it was before. Everybody hated Scott from the get. This documentarian, if you are going to do investigative journaling and you're going to do a documentary, don't let Peterson run the show. And I understand, right? Because you want to get his interview that you have to I guess allow him to say what he wants to say. But in my opinion, if you're going to be an investigative journalist and you're going to have a documentary, then investigate. First and foremost, and I will repeat myself, the people had turned on Scott before Amber Frey, period. Amber Frey came in, and that was like the last nail in the coffin for the public. Second of all, I don't care who you're interviewing, having the world turn on you, the entire world has to feel awful. Has to feel awful. We already know the answer to this question. Useless. This may be the only normal reaction that I've seen Scott have, but these are not the questions that I want to hear a journalist ask someone like Scott Peterson. This is not what I need. I want to ask questions about the conversations that he had with Laci before he decided to take his boat out on Christmas Eve. Because I have to tell you, and maybe I'm different. Leave it in the comments down below. As a wife, as a mother, 8 months pregnant, and I'm getting ready to go visit our family on Christmas Eve, and you're like, hey, I'm going to take my boat out. There's going to be a conversation to be had about that. I want to hear how you can diminish Amber Frey to just sex and just some girl outside of my marriage, and she made it into something that it wasn't after Laci, disappeared and after she came out, when we have 29 hours of wiretap of you telling her the opposite. Which one is it? I want to hear how you can say that it's a disgusting allegation that police say that you didn't want to be a husband or a father and you weren't telling anybody that you had a wife or a baby. I want to hear why you were wearing a hello, my name is horny bastard tag at a conference for your job. There are so many other questions that we could be asking, and I can tell you that at the beginning of this episode, I was annoyed already. Annoyed. He says, and I quote, I was a total a-hole to be having sex outside our marriage. But again, this is a perfect time for the documentarian to say, but this wasn't just sex. You had a whole relationship with Amber Frey. We have proof of that. We have your voice. Perfect opportunity here. Shireen then asks, why didn't you tell anybody about Amber Frey? And he says, because he did anything and everything to bring his family home, which we all know is not true. He did not do anything and everything. He did not take a polygraph test. He did not want to let the police in his home without a search warrant. He did not cooperate with police. He did not tell the police about Amber Frey. But it's funny because in other interviews, he will tell you that he told the police about Amber Frey right away. Which one is it? Which one is it? The other thing is, as an investigative journalist, which I am not, but as an investigative journalist, I would say, you know what, Scott? Those tapes of you talking to Amber shows me that you are comfortably lying. You are comfortable in this space of lying. How can I trust that you're being truthful with me now? I'll wait. He then says Amber tried to turn it into something more than it was after she came forward, which he understands. Why? Why do you understand that? Why? He goes, I guess I understand. Why? Why would she go out of her way to call the police to let them know everything that you were doing and then tape you behind your back? And then my brain, and yeah, I understand her feeling and the way she does. Also thinking it's more than something that it is after listening to 29 hours of phone calls with you. She is the love of your life. You want to spend forever with her and raise her child because you never want to be a father, but her child is perfect for you, right? Yeah, I can understand why she thinks that she is in more of than a sexual relationship, that she's in an actual relationship, because you made her think that way. Again, something for the documentarian to ask. You claim that she comes out and makes it more than what it is. Is it or is it not true that you made her think that it was more than it was? Yay or nay? Because me thinks that you made her think that this was a thing because you are comfortable in lying. What I would give to be a fly on the wall if Amber Frey ever saw this clip. And then he goes on to say, these are the thoughts that haunt him. These are the thoughts that haunt you? Cheating on my wife. Okay, but here's another thing. Cheating on my wife is the thought that haunts me, right? I regret this. I should have never done this. I should have never had sex outside our marriage. Wasn't it you on tape that told Diane Sawyer that you told Laci about the affair and she was totally fine with it? Do you just lie so much you forget about which one goes where? He comes out and he says, me having sex with Amber Frey caused the police not to look for Laci alive. I think that the police knew Laci was deceased before Amber Frey even existed. After all this, they go to show different news clips saying that they are still searching for Laci and that the police still have not named Scott as a suspect. The public has named him, absolutely. The public The public went wild in this case, and we'll get to that too, but the police have not yet named him as a suspect. Mike Gudgel comes in and he gets introduced, and he's an investigative journalist. And in 2002, he was working for ABC News. And he comes in and he starts going along with the working theory that 6 Modesto witnesses saw Laci and her dog walking on the day of Christmas Eve after 10 a.m. And this makes the police theory not solid. And again, and I brought this up in my last video, that's fine. All these people can say what they want to say. They can absolutely say that they saw her walking, or someone who looked like her walking the #1 most common dog in America. What proof do you have? Are you sure it was Christmas Eve? Are you sure it wasn't the 25th or I guess 23rd, because the 24th she was gone. But are you sure it wasn't the 22nd? Something, along those lines before then. And then this is where they introduce their new theory. So the LA Innocence Project comes out, and Scott Peterson come out, and Mike Gudgel and the private investigator, I forgot his name, but the private investigator that the Peterson family had hired. And they come out and they say that there was a burglary across the street at the Medina household. The Medina family leaves their house around 10:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve, and they don't come back until the 26th. And then supposedly at some point during the day, there's 5 men burglarizing this home, and there's a van, and that's when Laci goes missing. There's discrepancies in the story and when the burglary actually happened. So on Christmas Eve, Diane Jackson was coming home from the hand therapist and claims to have seen 3 dark-skinned but not black men. Hello, can I talk? Not black men with a van in the driveway of the Medina household. She said that they looked at her with hostility, so she kept driving. She didn't really think anything of it until the Laci Peterson case showed up, and then she came forward with this information. The police end up putting out a $1,000 reward for anybody who came forward with the information, and they made an arrest of 2 men who were Caucasian almost immediately, and also had no ties to a van, but they had ties to a car. Those men were Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce. So here's what I can say about eyewitness testimony. Diane Jackson notes 3 dark-skinned men that are not African-American next to a van, and police arrest 2 Caucasian males who are not associated with the van, but who have a car, who have admitted to this said burglary, which is important. They're extremely cooperative. They even did polygraph tests, which is more than we can say for Scott Peterson. And they did not want to be associated with this case at all. And they were like, listen, yeah, we're burglars, okay? Like, we burgled that shit, but we're not murderers. And also, we know that people who hurt mothers and children in prison do not fare well. So they wanted everybody to know that they were not a part of this crime at all. We didn't do that. We did this. We did some Home Alone type shit over here. We did not hurt Laci and her son. Allegedly, there is an informant somewhere that told them that there were up to 5 people who committed these burglaries, and then the police never looked into it. One of the detectives comes out and has said, I would love to know who these other people are, because they never got any information leading that way. Diane also claimed that she saw a van, but she couldn't tell them what color the van was. She also couldn't tell them what color the people were. So the police come out and say that the burglary actually happened on the 26th, but that information is coming from Stephen Todd, one of the actual burglars. And allegedly, we're getting this information from Mike Gudgel, who is the investigative journalist, that he changed his story from the 27th to the 26th. So take that for what you will. Now, the sister brings up a really good point, actually, when she starts talking about this. She said that the neighborhood is crawling with police and reporters and dogs and everything because Laci is still actively missing. So how is it that they could get into the Medina home at any point in time after Christmas Eve without anybody noticing? That's a good point. Scott says that we know that Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce burgled the home, but the cops didn't want to look at the evidence that connects them to Laci. and then provides no evidence. They are connected, but how? On January 24th, which is 1 month after Laci goes missing, the police go to do a press release. And this press release shook America to its core because this was not an update about Laci Peterson. But this is when they introduced the world to Amber Frey. Watching her come out shaking and crying, and her first words are, "I'm so sorry" to Laci and her family. Oh my God, I could not imagine the fear running through her at that time. Laci's mother comes out and says, "We are absolutely shocked by this affair." And basically she goes on to say, if we didn't know about that, what else do we not know about? I believe she says something along the lines, Scott needs to come and have a conversation with us. Then Scott decides he's going to start doing interviews. So here comes the infamous interview with Diane Sawyer, which, how he could get on TV and say the things that he says, the world may never know. Okay? He tells Diane Sawyer that he had already told Laci about Amber Frey and that Laci was fine with it. 8 months pregnant, Christmas Eve, new baby, happy marriage. Oh, and he has a girlfriend. I'm totally fine with it. And Diane Sawyer goes, "Do you really expect us to believe that a pregnant mother and wife would be okay with you having an affair?" And he goes, "You don't know our relationship. I'm the only one who knows our relationship," basically. Which is very interesting because at the beginning, which I've already touched on, at the beginning he talks about how much he regrets the affair and those thoughts haunt him and that he was a total a-hole for stepping out on his marriage. But why would you feel that way if Laci was fine with it? Right? Like, why is that a bad thing? Like, I told her and she's like, "Oh, okay, not a big deal." Whatever. They don't match. Why would you carry guilt if you guys had an understanding about your relationship, right? And then nobody knows about how open your relationship is besides you and Laci. Also, I would like to know when he told her this about Amber Frey, because she had a really close relationship with her family. She had a really close group of friends. So when did you tell her? And she just never told anybody about this? She was just like, "Oh, that's fine. No big deal." It wasn't like you spent a little bit of money over your budget on something, right? It wasn't like you, he makes it seem like you accidentally washed and dried all my clothes with the heat setting on and now they're all shrunk. Like, it's just so asinine to me. It's so crazy for him to have an affair and say that he brought it up to his wife and his wife's like, whatever. Not a big deal. This was a woman who told her family and her friends everything. But not this. This isn't something that she might have had to work out in her brain to process, to nothing. Just, oh yeah, whatever. You seen somebody else? Horny bastard? Cool. What? He told Diane Sawyer that he immediately told the police about Amber Frey on December 24th and that he was forthcoming with them, which is not true because we know that the police had no idea about Amber Frey until she called into the police hotline. So let's say this working theory, right? He claims that he told the police about Amber Frey, okay? He tells the police about Amber Frey. Does he not think that the police are going to go to Amber Frey? Yet he still has conversations with her over the phone? 29 hours worth? Lying to her, talking about how he's traveling, calling her on the day of Laci's memorial, saying that he's in Paris and how Amber's the love of his life and whatever. In another interview that they show, they ask him about a polygraph test. And He says a polygraph is one of those things. I'm not saying I have. I'm not saying I haven't. What? If you took it, just say I've already taken a polygraph test and I passed. And if you didn't take it, also say that. If he came out and he said, listen, I'm not taking a polygraph test. It's not admissible in court. They're not always the most reliable. My legal team has advised me against it because of the state of this case. Whatever. Polygraph test, if somebody's like, oh, I didn't take a polygraph test, like that doesn't bother me. I think because I know so much about true crime and I know that you can't use it in court and I know that they are not the most reliable tests. They're not actually reliable at all. So if somebody was like, yeah, I didn't want to take a polygraph test because it's not reliable, I would completely understand. But for you to sit here and be like, I can't tell you if I did or didn't. What? This is so crazy to me. Again, but is this something that the investigative journalist could bring up? Did you take a polygraph test? Yes or no? It's a yes or no question. I want a yes or a no. Yes, I did. What were the results? No, I didn't. Why? Instead, we get, were you upset when America hated your guts? It just seems like a very odd thing to lie about. Like, he lies about the oddest stuff. Scott also says in an interview that you can't do an interview because they're going to be edited and they're going to be awful. He just knows that the interviews are already going to be working against him. And then he goes on to say that he's been spit on at gas stations. He's had death threats on the phone, which I do absolutely believe. And I don't understand the phenomenon of people who do this. I saw this a lot in the new case, the Karen Reed case, where people were getting harassed and the teenagers were getting harassed. And, in our court of law, there are only certain things that are allowed to come into evidence, right? Only certain things that the jurors are allowed to know in order for us to get fair trials, okay? I never understood harassing someone, especially Scott Peterson. I think he's guilty, okay? This is not a man I would talk to if he was out. Okay, let's take Casey Anthony. I think she's guilty, okay? But she's out and about. I'm not going to spit on her or punch her in the face, but I also don't have to have any interactions with her at all. I don't understand Scott. Before he was even proven guilty, before he was convicted, he's getting harassed. And I think that's so bizarre. If a case has nothing to do with you, you need not get involved unless it's like to help a search party or something like that. Like, I don't understand how people go above and beyond, because then this turns cases into guilty until proven innocent, which is not fair. Which is not what our judicial system is set up for. Why people do that until we have clear, concise evidence and a conviction, I will never know. He had still not been named as a suspect yet from the police. This is all still public opinion. And trust me, I am not standing up for Scott Peterson. No way, no how, okay? That is not happening. However, everybody deserves a fair trial. That's the way that our society has been built. He says that all this stuff took a toll on him. And yeah, I cannot imagine. There are people wearing shirts with his face on it, with rope around his neck. There are people wearing shirts that say murderer with his face on it. That would take a toll on anybody. But it's interesting to me that he comes out and he says that all the harassment took a toll on him. Not the fact that his wife was missing. He has yet to say about how devastated he was about her, about his son, about where she was, any of that. Anyway, they start doing water searches in the Berkeley Marina, and I believe they said that they did into the mid 500s into searches. They were all over the place where Scott said that he was. They brought divers, they brought water dogs, just absolutely everything. There was a police officer who was talking about his personal attachment to this case and how it's hard to not get attached to cases like this. And he gets a little choked up in his interview. And this is 22 years later. He gets choked up in an interview. about a woman that he doesn't know, and he's searching for her. There is more emotion in this man 22 years later than Scott has 22 years later, or at the time. One of the investigators on the case said that they found 2 homemade anchors that matched the ones that were found in Scott's shop, but they were told that they were not a part of the case and were not put into evidence, and they were just tossed back into the Berkeley Marina. What? Also, littering? Like, why didn't you just take them out and throw them away if you weren't going to put them in evidence? I just thought that was such a weird part of the story. And then I guess they wanted to go back and see if they could find the anchors, and then they couldn't. Yeah, it was lucky that you found them a first time. Point Isabel is brought to our attention, and it is said that a lot of times when bodies go missing in the bay, the tides carry them to Point Isabel. And on April 14th, 2003, a woman was walking down the shore of Point Isabel and came across a female body. There was a torso that was wrapped in duct tape, and we were also informed that there was an infant found the day before. Keep in mind that the police that found her at Point Isabel, their first inclination was, we need to contact the Modesto Police Department. And when this information was released, everyone collectively held their breath. Everyone, it seems, but oh, Scotty boy. He's extremely calm, nonchalant, and he flat out says to the interviewer, I never thought it was them. It never even crossed my mind. Just another pregnant woman and another full-term baby. April 17th, the police start following Scott. So Scott goes on to say that whenever there were hard times, his family goes out and they go fishing or they go camping. And the guys get together. Nobody talks about anything, but they get together and they just be as one. And the day of the arrest, I guess that's what they had decided to do, that they were all going to play golf together, him, his dad, and his brothers, from what I could understand from the story. And he knew that he was being followed, but at the time he claims that he was being followed by the media. He didn't know that he was actually being tailed by police. He also did not know at the time that the police were listening to his phone calls. So Scott starts weaving in and out of traffic. He thinks that he's trying to dodge the media, and the police make a last-minute decision that they have to arrest him. So they end up arresting him in front of the golf club that he was meeting his family at. And when he gets out of the car, Scott looks like a completely different person. He has blonde hair, he has a goatee, and it is not the Scott Peterson that everybody is used to seeing. And again, there's absolutely no emotion. I could tell you, I would be a little perturbed if I was being arrested for something I didn't do. In the search of his car, they found multiple cell phones, a bag of Viagra, because, changes of clothes, camping gear, his brother's driver's license, and $10,000 cash. The theory was that he was going to flee to Mexico. We go on to get an explanation for everything except for the camping gear and the Viagra, which why? He had a bag, like a sack of Viagra. He claims that the reason that he dyed his hair was due to the harassment and the death threats, so he wanted to look different and he didn't want the media to catch him. But he wants to make it clear that he was never running from the police. He was always in contact with police. Well, sometimes, because sometimes he would get frustrated with them. But at this time, we also know through interviews with Laci's family and with the police that he's actually not being cooperative at this time. He said that he had his brother's driver's license on him because he wanted to get a discount for playing golf. But he also said that he was going to play with his brothers. So was his brother there at the time? I'm confused about that part of the story, about which brother was there and which driver's license he had. And they also said that he had $10,000 in cash because his other brother was buying him out of a truck. So they seem to have explanations for almost everything in that truck. They show him being led into a courtroom, and he says, I was hoping that when I was arrested that the police would come to the realization that they had made a mistake. How could they come to the realization if you never give them anything? How could they come to that realization if you never said anything? You never did anything. You never said anything. You never helped them. You never led them anywhere. There was just nothing. And for some reason at this point, I felt a sadness. Like I was starting to feel my feels. I don't enjoy watching people in jumpsuits. I don't enjoy watching people get sentenced. I don't enjoy watching people get sentenced to the death penalty, even though I agree with it. None of it feels good, right? Let's go back to the Alex Murdaugh case. That is a case that I watched from beginning to end. And I wanted him to be found guilty because I believed that he really had something to do with the murder of his family. But when they came out and read that verdict and it happened, yes, you want them to feel guilty because you can't function in society, but also it doesn't feel good. Like none of it feels good and it feels sad. And it is not uncommon for someone to go to prison for something that they didn't do. And we see it a lot. We see, why the death penalty is so controversial, because there are people who sit on death row for a long time who we find out later were innocent. And it just made me think about what if, I'm not saying he is, but what if, right? That was a different person and he was innocent. And that feeling, watching that footage back, it feels bad. And don't get me wrong, I still think he's guilty. And I still think his actions are bizarre. Bizarre. And I think his just behavior from then and now is bizarre. But I did feel a level of sadness because if I was in this position and I really didn't do anything wrong and the focus was on me, how do you get out of something like that? But again, different strokes for different folks, I guess, but I would scream from the rooftops that I had absolutely nothing to do with this. Which goes to show that he is a pretty good storyteller to make me be like, this feels bad. At this point of the episode, it has me just a little bit more confused, I would say, and just emotionally confused, I guess. Because I was starting, and his sisters did bring up some good points, and I'm like, okay, documentaries doing what documentaries do, I guess. The sister said that they were in complete shock and disbelief when she found out that Scott was arrested. And I would be interested to hear what the family was really thinking at this time. Did they wholeheartedly think that their son was innocent? Or are they so blinded by their love for this family member that they couldn't believe it? I have to tell you, as a mother, you would have to go to the ends of the earth to prove to me that my child is a monster. I don't know. That's such a, oh God. I think about this often, right? When you have cases where you have parents on both sides, you're either a victim of a monster or your child is the monster. Both families torn apart, right? Both families have to choose a side. And I don't know if I would be strong enough not to have blinders on for my own children and be like, my son could never be capable of this. I don't know. I love my kids to the depths of this earth. And as their mother, I don't know if I would be capable of being like, yeah, they could do this. But it's pure devastation all around. All around. And I'd like to know if the Peterson family, obviously we know that his sister and his sister-in-law, their thoughts have not changed. They think that he's innocent 20 years later. But what about his brothers? What about his parents? So the sister goes on to say that she lives in San Diego and his parents live in San Diego. And at this point that he was spending a lot of time with his family. San Diego borders Mexico. That's important. So the police are out here making a theory that he's trying to flee to Mexico, which would make a lot of sense. You have your brother's ID. You've changed your appearance. You've packed clothes. You've packed camping gear. You've packed money. You packed Viagra for some reason. Their theory is that he's on the run. And it's interesting the way that they were able to spin it inside of the media and say that Scott was arrested within 30 miles of the Mexican border. If he was spending time at his family's house within 30 miles of the Mexican border, then yes, that would be true. But the tabloids are able to spin it the other way. And the reason that I'm saying it like this is not because I don't believe that he was trying to flee or that I don't believe, again, that he's guilty. What I'm trying to say is when you put things like that in the media and you put things out there and it spreads like wildfire, how does somebody like Scott get a fair trial? Again, how does he get one now with all the social media that we have? When you get to cases that are of this magnitude, how do you get 12 jurors that are not tainted? And I've really gotten into watching different cases and different true crime things. And when the media gets a hold of something, they can make it really toxic. They can make it really toxic for the people inside the case. I mean, they can make it really toxic for the jurors. And if these jurors aren't like sequestered, right, to a hotel room or, just an island, how do you not hear things? How do you not see things? That's got to be nearly impossible. And I'm not saying that any of this changes my mind, but I am saying that it is unfortunate that they may or may not have written a narrative that wasn't true. At the time of Scott's arrest, there was still no positive identification on the two bodies that were found at Point Isabel. 2003, April 18th, they have a press release stating that the bodies are that of Laci and Connor. And her mother just crumples into her chair, into her husband. And that is just devastating to watch. I got goosebumps. It was awful. It was also interesting to me, and I know that you have to keep a case clean, but that nobody was notified and they heard it through the press release. Everybody heard it the same way. I cannot imagine receiving news like that like everybody else. And the sister walks out of the press release at that time, and I could not imagine getting this news and then having a camera shoved directly into my face. And this was before we had like media like boundaries. It's insane. So they are starting to transfer Scott from San Diego to Modesto, California. And the police claimed that they told Scott that the bodies were identified and that it was of Laci and Connor. And that, again, there was no emotion. He bows his head, a single tear. He makes a sniffling sound, and there was silence. And after driving for a while, they stop at In-N-Out, and they claimed that he had a double with a milkshake and a fry. I don't know how I feel about this reaction as somebody who has gotten very terrible information, as somebody who has gone through some very traumatic things. I've said this before. I go very stone cold. I go very empty. And it's almost like time slows down in a way. And I have to process. And my body processes after my brain. Because the next day I tend to have a physical reaction. Usually I vomit. But when somebody gives me news, it is not my first reaction to go hysterical at all. It's like, okay, what? Like, it's a weird. I've been in places where something horrible has happened and I've just felt nothing until later. It has to like hit me later. So that's not what strikes me as odd. What strikes me as odd is Scott goes on to tell this story that he had some very terrible physical, visceral reaction. These are two wildly different stories. He also says that he's in disbelief and he couldn't believe that it was possible, which I don't know how you get there unless you just so badly don't want it to be true. Or you're a murderer. I don't know. But like, he claims that he didn't want to believe that what the police were telling him was true. Everybody had to have an understanding that the bodies that washed up on shore could have been Laci or Connor's, but not Scott. And it was also odd that he said that, because there's no inkling. I would have been calling right away. I would have been calling the Modesto Police Department and be like, hey, they found that. What is it? Who is it? Tell me anything and everything. In the next scene, they show the parents of Laci getting up on the stand or the podium and just talking about how now they can move forward. And her mom gets up there, and you can just feel just like the rage radiating from her. And she's like, now she can get justice for her daughter. And these people are so unbelievably strong. I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine. I don't ever want to imagine. Another thing that I don't understand is they're bringing Scott. They get to the prison a little bit after midnight, and there are just hundreds of people, children with signs, cheering, and go home. Like, why are you? I don't understand these things. Why are you there? Why are you holding up a sign that he's a murderer? I mean, and you can feel a certain type of way. I feel a certain type of way. But again, he wasn't convicted yet. Like, why do people insert themselves in things that they just has nothing to do with them? Why are you standing in front of the Modesto Police Department with a sign that says Scott Peterson is a murderer? Why are we cheering like this is a basketball game? His family ends up getting Mark Geragos as their attorney. They saw him on Larry King Live, and somehow they got into contact with him, and they decided to get him first, Scott. Let me give you a little introduction to who Mark Geragos is. He is one of the most well-known defense attorneys in the United States. With a career spanning decades, Geragos has represented high-profile clients in some of the most talked-about legal cases in recent history. I'll give you 10. Michael Jackson. Geragos represented the pop culture icon during his child molestation allegations in 2003. Scott Peterson. Geragos was the defense attorney for Scott Peterson in the highly publicized case involving the murder of Peterson's wife, Laci Peterson. Chris Brown. Geragos defends the singer following his arrest for assaulting Rihanna in 2009. Winona Ryder. He represented the actress during her 2002 trial for shoplifting. Gary Condit. Geragos represented the former U.S. congressman when he was under investigation in connection with the disappearance of intern Chandra Levy. Jesse Smollett. Geragos defended the actor after he was accused of staging a hate crime in 2019. Colin Kaepernick. Geragos represented the NFL quarterback in his lawsuit against the NFL, alleging collusion to keep him out of the league after he began protesting racial injustice. Kesha. He was a part of the legal team representing the singer in her lawsuit against producer Dr. Luke over allegations of abuse. Susan McDougal. Geragos successfully defended Susan, a key figure in the Whitewater controversy involving President Bill Clinton. And Winona Judd. He represented the country singer in her divorce proceedings. What a rundown. And I got to be honest with you, I think this was absolutely the right call for the Peterson family. Like, you have to have somebody who understands how to navigate media of this size. You have to have somebody who can talk to the public and put on a trial. Everybody in this case became overnight celebrities. The attorneys, Scott, Laci, their families. It was insane. They show Scott's mother walking into the courthouse, and she's connected to like an oxygen machine, and people are just shoving cameras in her face. And also, like, I've never understood people villainizing, like the parents you could villainize Chris Watts's parents, because after he admitted to murdering his wife and children, they're like, not my Christopher. Like, they're whatever. Villainize them. But like, Scott did this on his own accord. His family has no idea, right? That, well, maybe, but his family has no idea that he did this. And they're just completely like villainizing the parents before we even figure out what's going on inside of this trial. So the legal team decided to prep for this trial, and they asked a man to come inside and do a mock cross examination. And Scott fails miserably. I'll bet you can guess why. It's because his odd behavior. He is an odd man. Also, we've seen the way that he's talked to police. We've seen the way that he's done interviews. We saw him with Diane Sawyer. Yeah, cross-examination was not, he would have been destroyed, completely destroyed. So the defense decides to keep him off the stand, which in most cases the defense is going to do. But I have to tell you, if I was defending myself against something that I didn't do and the death sentence was on the docket, just please let me get up there and speak. Like, I have to defend myself. They say that Scott Peterson's case is a character evidence case and that it's all smoke and mirrors and there is absolutely no circumstantial evidence. The Geragos team comes out and makes a great opening defense. How are they supposed to get a fair trial when you have people with Scott's face on t-shirts yelling he's a murderer outside of this courtroom? You have his face on billboards, on tabloids, on newspapers. People actively calling him a monster in public. And the public had already decided that Scott was guilty. So when you are a juror and you're one of 12 people, buying produce and you see his face everywhere, I know you're not supposed to take that into consideration. But how do you not? How do you get a fair trial anywhere now? Because this is national news, if not worldwide at this point. The first thing that they call into question is his behavior. Yes, he's a liar. Yes, he's a cheater. Yes, he has zero emotional depth. But does that make him a killer? And that's something that you have to decide on when you're putting yourself in the headspace of a juror. He can still be all of those things and not capable of murder. Your job as a juror is to convict without any doubt. 100%, 1000%. And the question when this case is brought up is, was there enough physical evidence, or was this about the way that they felt because of who Scott was as a person? In the beginning, they were starting to win because the prosecution comes out and they say that Scott talks about how Martha Stewart was talking about meringues, and they say that that wasn't even true. That was a lie. She wasn't talking about meringues. Well, Geragos rolls out the TV and he's like, here, meringues. And they show Martha Stewart talking about meringues. And when you look at the prosecution in this documentary, you're like, yikes. This is not great. There's no evidence of a violent crime anywhere, right? There's no blood in the house. There's no blood at the warehouse. There's no blood on the boat, which leads us back to the original theory that I had, that there was some sort of asphyxiation, and they start calling it a soft kill. But the problem is they have no idea how Laci died, because you never find out a cause of death during the trial. So Al Burkini gets on the stand and Geragos absolutely grills him, which is his job of cross-examination. And his job is to point holes in every single story. The defense attorney's job is not to prove that Scott is innocent. It's to prove that there's reasonable doubt. He might be innocent. That's it. That's all his job is. There was a big argument about whether Laci does or doesn't know about the boat. Well, we can't ask her. And just because she never told anybody about the boat doesn't mean that she didn't know about it. The detective says that she has no idea about the boat, which we have no proof of. Geragos says that she absolutely knows about the boat, which we have no proof of. And then there was a piece where Geragos says that you redacted something from your initial report. Allegedly, there was a bathroom at the warehouse on the 23rd of December, the day before Laci goes missing. and she was there and used the bathroom. And that was somebody who was there that the police interviewed and asked, and they told them that story. And I guess that was in his initial report, but then was taken out. And I gotta say, that doesn't look great. I cannot imagine sitting on this jury. I know how I feel about going into this trial, but if you're a juror, right, you're not supposed to have any of that information. You're not going to have any like preconceived notion of who Scott is, and you're supposed to have as limited information as possible, and like you're supposed to be able to be objective. And that's really what you have to ask yourself. Was there enough evidence, factual evidence, to prove that Scott was guilty of this? Or is it truly just a character crime? Are they basing Laci's murder off of his behavior, off of his affair, off of his lies? I mean, I could tell you what I think, but as a jury, you know what you're supposed to do. Is it enough? Geragos then comes out and makes some mighty big promises. He says, not only are we going to prove that Scott is absolutely innocent, we're then going to find the person who killed Laci and Connor, and we're going to get him. And the jury's like, okay. And that did not happen. And one of the women inside of the documentary said, Geragos overpromised and underserved. And that's not good when you have a jury. So that's kind of where this shift takes place, and Geragos starts to lose momentum. I believe that if he just tried to poke reasonable doubt and not made all these other claims, it's quite possible that this verdict could have been different. Amber Frey takes the stand, and this becomes yet another pivotal moment in the case. It opens it up for the jury to listen to this 29 hours of taped phone calls. I can't imagine what that's like, because here you are, you're sitting there again. Yes, this guy is comfortable in lying. Yes, this guy is a complete a-hole. Yes, this guy had an affair. They talked about bringing up the witnesses that stated that Laci was walking the dog in the neighborhood. But again, this is to the point I brought up in my first video. You saw a woman who was pregnant, maybe, walking the most common dog in America. We have no videotape. We have no hard, solid evidence or proof that that was her. We have no Ring doorbells. So the documentary states that because the burglary was not entered into evidence, the jury had no other reasons on why Laci could have disappeared. So Scott goes in to talk about how he wouldn't waive time on his trial. And he thought that maybe now he thinks that if he had given his defense team more time, that they could have added more evidence and he could have been proven innocent. But he didn't want to waive the trial because, and I quote, "I just wanted to get out of jail and move on with my life." And that statement, again, doesn't make any sense to me, because if you truly are innocent, why would you not do anything you possibly could to prove that in a court of law? It took the jury 40 hours to deliberate. A juror is being interviewed, and he talks about when he came out, he was sweating, his heart was pounding, and I personally could not imagine having to sentence another person to life in prison or death or any of these things. It makes me sick just to watch it. I know that Scott's been in prison for 20 years, but to listen to them read that verdict just makes me feel icky. It makes me feel bad. And that has to be one of the hardest things to do. And I hope to never be a part of something like that. But I can't imagine having somebody else's fate in my hands. They come out and they say that they found him guilty, and there are just scenes of people cheering. Like, it's just the last buzzer beater in a national championship of some sort. Just so bizarre. There are reports that the judge got choked up with emotion. Laci Peterson's family obviously sobbing, right? I'm sure Scott's family devastated. Yes, there's a closure for one family. There's a devastating beginning for another family. It's just, nobody wins in these scenarios. Nobody. And they go on to say that, again, Scott has zero emotion. Although I don't know how much emotion I would have if somebody just sentenced me to life in prison. Like, I don't know. Like, that's got to be such a shocking moment. Whether you did or didn't do it, if you didn't think that that was coming and it's a surprise, like, that just has to be such a shocking moment. I really liked when the jurors came out and they said, we just found a man guilty of killing his wife and his son. What is there to cheer about? He was convicted of first and second degree murder and was eligible for the death penalty. The sister-in-law brings up a really great point. She says, now you have to ask the jurors who think that he's guilty of this crime to not take his life. How do you do that? Good Lord. They've already convicted him, right? They already think he's guilty. How do you, by the way, could you let him live? Like, oh my God. And it did not work because he was sentenced to death. At the end of the second episode, they're setting it up, obviously, for the third episode, and that they're talking to us about as the dust settles. Everybody sort of knew that the evidence was not compelling enough for Scott to get the death penalty or be charged with a guilty verdict at all. They claim that the police were laser focused on Scott from the beginning. They claim that they didn't do their jobs when it came to eyewitnesses or the burglary across the street. I just want to hear the sister-in-law say, yes, my brother-in-law's behavior was bizarre. Yes, my brother-in-law did not cooperate. Yes, my brother-in-law had an affair. Yes, any of these things. But she doesn't say anything like that. Nobody in the documentary acknowledges his odd behavior, his lack of emotion, his lack of cooperation, like it didn't exist. Like we didn't see it on camera. Like we didn't hear those tapes to Amber Fry. Like we didn't watch him talk to Diane Sawyer. Why didn't you bring that up again? We just float over the fact that he said that Laci was fine with him having an affair. Like, what are we doing? The sister-in-law goes on to say that they've never had a light at the end of the tunnel. And now they have the LA Innocence Project that's coming in, and they feel like this could really turn things around for Scott. This episode emotionally was very heavy. I am the mother of a daughter. I am the mother of a son, and I could not imagine sitting on either side. Losing a daughter, losing a daughter-in-law and your son, knowing that your son is capable of this behavior. I can't fathom what that's like on either side. I do understand why mothers stand behind their children and go to the ends of the earth for them. I absolutely, 1000% I would do that for my children. This episode really makes you realize how many people are affected by Laci's loss and Connor's loss, right? Her family, his family, Amber Fry moving forward, her family, knowing that she's been attached to this, the jurors, the police, just so many people devastated. I don't know if you'll ever hear me cheering for a person to be sentenced to the death penalty. I do believe in the death penalty. I do think that there are people who cannot function in our society. But to hear people cheer and clap and jump up and down and high five over the loss of life and this justice being had is weird. It all just made me feel really bad. This whole episode made me feel bad. Still has not changed my mind about how I feel about Scott. Actually, it makes me more infuriated with the documentarian and the way that she asks questions or lack thereof. But that's my opinion. My name is Bacon Bears. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment box down below. I'm going to go take a nap.